Hi students, it's Mrs. T, and this is your geography lesson, the first one of this week, as we look at the basics of our cultural geography class. So in the last video from the week one folder, you got technically your first lesson ever in cultural geography, so you know that cultural geography and human geography are words that you can use interchangeably. And in this video today, what we're going to talk about is more of the spatial analysis, the ways in which a cultural geographer looks at the world, because of course geography means drawing the world. Geo is earth, and graphy means drawing, like there's a word cartography, which means you are drawing maps, and maps are essential in understanding the way in which geographers conceptualize and display the information about human activities in our spaces, our living spaces. So, what we're going to talk about in this first video are the basic questions that geographers ask compared to historians. And perhaps, I'm not sure, but perhaps you've had more history in your educational background than you've had geography. And so we're going to talk about the difference in the way that historians, we'll talk about history for just a tiny little bit because it's part of geography, but there's a different way that historians ask questions about the world than geographers. And so we're going to talk about that in this lesson too. So I've already thrown out a couple of vocabulary words at you, cartography being one of them, drawing maps, and then also spatial analysis, which is one of the first themes that we're going to discuss from chapter 1 in your textbook. So you do need to get your textbook if you don't already have it. Chapter 1 is the assigned reading for this particular week. Okay, so in week 2, like I said, we're going to look at the why of where. Those kinds of questions are what a geographer wants to know. History questions tend to talk about when a whole lot. Maybe why, but there's also a lot of when, who, and what happened. In geography, we want to know where mainly. Why should we care about what happened where and why did it happen there? And so I recall a couple of semesters ago in one of my face-to-face geography classes, we were talking about something that's coming up in a future week called the demographic transition, where we look at the growth rate of population over time. And we were looking at some of the reasons why population was able to grow at such rapid rates at certain periods of history. And I recall talking about foraging, which is a food getting strategy that we will cover briefly in our class in a future week. And foraging was the primary way that all human cultures survived as long as 40,000 years ago until very, very long ago in history, like 13,000 years ago was about when we find archaeology evidence of horticulture. And so I was talking about demographic transition and using foraging and these dates that I just threw out at you that span a long period of time, like tens of thousands of years. And then we jumped all the way from foraging and horticulture to the Industrial Revolution in part of our, which of course is, during Queen Victoria's era, toward the end of the reign of Queen Victoria, of course, is the end of the Industrial Revolution. So anyway, we as geographers are interested in history, but we can jump in our explanations from a part of ancient history to a part of relatively recent human history to answer our questions of why something happened where. Then also what was that happened and why did it happen in that place? So we have a spatial analysis that we focus on in geography class. Not the history questions, although history is part of understanding why answers. So we do have to talk about some of that. But I remember one student in particular in my face-to-face class kind of laughed out loud. I asked him, what's up, explain. And he laughed out loud that we jumped so many hundreds, of years, thousands of years in history, just within one lecture on one chart called the demographic transition. So we will look at that together in the demographic transition specifically. We will look at that together in a later video, video lesson that we do together. But now I want to talk to you about not only the why of where, and that's the question, the primary way we're going to have to probably morph the way we ask questions and that we understand information in this class. If you tend to have more history in your background than you do geography, you're going to have to kind of morph that way of thinking, or stop yourself, I guess, of thinking about why and when and dates and, the kind of story that we tell in a chronological or a time sequential pattern. And now we're going to look at space and place and human interaction with that and movement across places and spaces and times. All of those kinds of things are what we're going to focus on in cultural geography. But we do display the information that we discover. We do display it in maps. And so today, in this first video, I want to look at some maps with you and talk about the distortions. I've got the word distortions written here. Maps always have distortions in them. Not even intentional distortions, but there are always distortions in maps that can create a particular kind of concept, like a mental construct of a place and of space that might not necessarily be reality. And so we have to, as geographers, try to interpret the maps that we are looking at and try to acknowledge the distortions that might be there so that they don't give us an inaccurate mental picture of what reality is, what space and place actually are in that particular situation. So one map that I want to start with, I hope I have it up here on the, nope, I don't, let's see. Okay, well, here is a picture of a variety of maps. I can show this one. Let me move me out of the way. But I know I have, there's a Mercator projection. Okay, so one of the problems that we have in making maps on this two-dimensional surface, there we go, is the fact that the Earth is a sphere, right? It's an oblate spheroid, to be exact. But the Earth is a sphere, and when you're trying to take this curvature portion, any curvature portion of the Earth, and make it flat to depict it, it causes distortions. So this is probably a map that you are very familiar with. It's a Mercator projection map. It's used primarily to show distance. It was created, distance and navigation. It was created centuries ago for navigation of the world. It put everything out flat so that you could see where you were in this in the oceans as you navigated by boat around to the different locations in the world. However, these lines that I'm following with the arrow here, these lines are called longitudinal lines, and the lines across the horizontal lines are latitude lines. They are equidistant from each other. They mark equidistant numbers of degrees, minutes, and seconds of space. That's the way that we measure space on the globe. Latitudes mark a particular amount of degrees, minutes, and seconds above the equator toward the poles. They are equidistant from each other. However, as you look at the way this map, because we are trying to take that globe and spread it out flat, you see that the latitude lines are very close to each other down here and very far apart from each other down here. And so that's part of the distortion that this map puts in our mental concept of the world. If you only looked at this flat map to try to understand the world, a country like Greenland, which is where I'm pointing right here, which is actually very small. This country, Greenland, looks ginormous, if that's a word. It looks ginormous on this map. It looks almost as big or bigger than Africa, which is one of the largest continents on the planet. So this Africa landmass here is actually, I think it's 14 times larger than Greenland actually is. But if you looked at this Mercator projection, that's the distortion shows that this is huge and this is closer to the correct size that it would be on the globe, which let me go back here. So see this white area on the map there, that is Greenland, and here's Africa over here on the sphere. Here's Greenland up here on this partial conical projection, and here's Africa over here. See, so Africa is much bigger. Here is Greenland on the Mercator projection again, and Africa, it's actually much smaller than Africa is. But on the Mercator projection, that distorts the latitude and longitude because they're spreading it out into this rectangular form. You've got a different mental concept of what perhaps the world actually looks like, the globe and the map actually looks like. So as a geographer and as a student in this class, we're going to look at tons of maps. We won't always look, mostly we will not look at world projections as we go into the later chapters where we look at cultural identity and religious spread and stuff like this. We will look at world maps, flow maps in particular. Let me see, I had one open. Let me see if I can find it. There's a flow map. This is about tourism in the world. And so a flow map shows a world projection, and it maybe takes, you'll have to look at the legend down here to see what we're looking for. But there's a color that represents in this particular map popular tourist destinations, and there's a dot that shows the location where people originate, and these flow lines showed various numbers of people in the millions traveling from one place to the next in the year 2011. From 2010 to 2011, as you can read on this map down here. So we will be looking at world maps, but very often we will look at just simply smaller regions, maybe a map of Pulaski County or a map of Chicago and transportation systems to and from a particular place. So every map that we look at has distortions, and it's important to know that those distortions can shape the way we think about the world. Some of the world projections, like this one, for instance, that has fewer distortions in it, still fewer distortions of landmass size, it perhaps distorts the idea of north, south, east, and west, where we've got straight up, straight down, and straight side to side. The Mercator projection does north, south, east, and west really well, and that is one of the primary reasons why we use it for navigation. So when you open up your GPS on your iPhone or Google Maps or whatever you use, it is a navigational map that primarily works from a Mercator projection kind of way, because if a road runs side to side like this on a navigational map, you will see it depicted that way when you are looking at these navigational aids that we have with our GPS, global positioning system software that comes included in our smartphones and Google Maps and things like that. So it's important to be aware that there are many different types of maps, many different types of many different distortions that maps include in them, unfortunately. For instance, look at Antarctica down here on this particular map example. It looks enormous. However, on this particular map example, on the very opposite corner, Antarctica just barely gets a little bit of representation down here on the edge because it's actually a very small landmass. This actually is a small-ish presentation of Antarctica that actually still, makes it quite larger than it actually is in reality, makes it appear quite larger than it actually is in reality. And look at the Mercator down here. Huge. Antarctica looks enormous, but it actually is not. So, okay, we're going to look at maps again in another video and talk about distortions some more and how they shape our concept of place and space and interaction. And so I'll see you in our next video.